This video celebrates African-American poet Mr. Emmett Wheatfall, a spoken word poet who lives in Portland, Oregon, where he reads, writes, publishes, and performs poetry. In addition to self-publishing, Wheatfall has had 2 poetry books published by Fernwood Press, an imprint of Barclay Press. His collection, As Clean as a Bone, was a 2019 Eric Hoofer Award finalist, as well as a Da Vinci Eye Award finalist. This video interview is divided into 9 chapters. The first chapter features Wheatfall talking about his family history, and chapters 2 and 3 cover his perspective on the craft of poetry and the form and function of poetry, respectively. In chapters 4 through 9, Wheatfall reads and discusses some of his favorite works from his As Clean as a Bone collection and his Our Scarlet Blue Wounds collection. This video series is made possible by a grant from the Library of America, a nonprofit organization which champions our nation's cultural heritage by publishing America's greatest writing in authoritative new editions and providing resources for readers to explore this rich, living legacy. This grant is also made possible through the generous support of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Corban University, a private Christian university in Salem, Oregon, commissioned this video series as part of Lift Every Voice, a year-long nationwide celebration of the 250-year tradition of African American poetry.
A little bit of my background. I was born in a place called Hopkinsville, Kentucky. My father was in the U.S. military, Army, infantryman, stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was born in 1957, August of 1957. I'm the oldest of 3 siblings of my parents. I had 2 sisters. My younger sister passed away of HIV/AIDS at the age of 33, and at times, her loss has influenced, my life, losing a younger sister. Growing up, my father served in the Korean War, did 2 tours in Vietnam. On his second tour in Vietnam, he stepped on a landmine, knew from experience that he was on a landmine. It was a pressure device. They couldn't undo it. He had to purposely fall off of it because he couldn't stand there for the duration of the war. Long story short, they did a great job of bandaging him up in the field. He was flown to Walter Reed Hospital, one that our president stayed in recently as a result of his contracting the COVID virus. And the physician was going to remove his right leg, and the head physician came in and said, "No, I think we could save it." And my father was able to, stay in the military in those particular days. Probably today he would have got a prosthesis. They would have removed the limb. Why am I telling you all this? Because as a young kid, as a military dependent, I lived a number of places. While my father was in Vietnam serving, I lived on an island called Okinawa in the Ryukyu Islands, 200 miles off the coast of Japan. Konnichiwa, Ohio gozaimasu. As a young Black American, I didn't grow up during the Civil Rights Movement. I was born in 1957, so while my father was off fighting wars, and my mother and with my sisters, we lived on military bases. So I grew up on Okinawa. I wouldn't trade in that experience for anything. I call myself the original Karate Kid. I took Taekwondo in a dojo, in a village. And that was a great experience. As young kids, we had the run of the island. I played in many of the trails and bunkers. That was our playground. The military did a great job taking care of us. When my father was wounded, we had to come back to the United States, so we came back to Hopkinsville, where Fort Campbell is, because my mother had relatives there in Kentucky. And I remember clearly the military vehicle pulling up in front of our house, and I feel my emotions welling up. But as a young boy, I opened up the curtains, and I saw probably the chaplain and a military officer walking up. And it reminded me of the movie Saving Private Ryan when she's in the window and the car is coming up. And so I remember my mother screaming, quote, "Oh my God, is he dead? Oh my God, is he dead?" unquote. I remember when my father came home, we were staying in an apartment over a drugstore. And I remember this 6'3" chiseled out of stone military sergeant, and with his crutches and his jacket over his shoulder. And the military let him stay in. He moved over to logistics. So we lived in Fort Lee, Virginia, and I went to junior high school there in the Fort Lee area. And then my father had to do a year assignment in Korea, called a MAG assignment, 1-year assignment. So we went to Salina, Kansas, did my sophomore year there. And then my father was going to retire. And so the United States military sent him to Portland, Oregon, where he was to advise the Oregon National Guard on behalf of regular Army. So he's still in the Army, but he advised them. He eventually retired. I went to James Madison High School my junior and senior year in Portland. As a matter of fact, they've just torn it down and rebuilt a new one. I'm a member of the class of 1976. How does all of this relate to poetry? I had a diverse experience growing up. I was fortunate enough to live in a foreign country, to experience different cultures, different parts of the United States. So when we came here in 1974, I was somewhat of an anomaly because I was different, because I had a real diverse experience. In high school, I got involved in theater, became a thespian, was in a number of plays. It was pretty tough for me to be in plays as a Black American, young Black youth. At that particular time, there weren't a lot of plays that had roles for young Black Americans. And I played Captain Brackett in South Pacific. There was no captains, I don't believe, in World War II in the South Pacific. I played Chief, I think it was Godota in Little Mary Sunshine, and, just ancillary parts in plays. But I got a chance to act, fell in love with it. Left there, went to college. In college, I got an opportunity to play the Greek Moor, Othello, by Shakespeare, who is the only, basically, person of color in the play. And it's one of those Shakespearean tragedies where pretty much everybody dies in the end. But it seemed to me that the visual arts more resonated with me. My father wanted me to major in accounting in college, and he said, "I'm not going to pay for you to go to college if you're going to do theater." So he didn't pay for me to go to college, and I did theater. But then, by that particular time, I met my wife, Karen Wheatfall, and we've been married going on 41 years now. We have 3 grown children now. It's the inverse. Our son is the youngest and 2 older daughters, where I was the oldest to my parents, and then I had 2 younger sisters. How did I arrive at poetry? I think it's a great story. One day I was at work and I had a friend of mine, and her and her husband were friends of my wife and I's, and she was a colleague at work, and she had wrote a poem for her husband's 60th birthday. And she knew that I did voiceover, and evidently had a good voice or liked my voice or whatever it was. And she said, I'd like for you, would you be willing to read the poem to him for his birthday? And I said, sure, we're friends. I'd love to do that. I'm honored that you'd asked me to do that. And when I read the poem, I knew nothing about poetry, but I knew that that poem wasn't very well written. I did know that. So what I did was I took a chance and I said to her, I said, would it be all right if I rework your poem a little bit to see if I can make it smoother and stuff like that? And she said, oh, okay, anything you could do to, because I want it to be good for him. And so I reworked it, but I had a thought. I said, wouldn't it be neat to put this to music too? And I'd never done that before. And so I said to her, I'm going to put it to music. And I called up, she's passed now, Miss Janice Scroggins. Miss Janice Scroggins was a legend in Oregon blues jazz. She's a pianist, literally a genius, and that's not an exaggeration. She was nominated for a Grammy. She played music, Scott Joplin-style music, where you play one rhythm in one hand and one in the other, and simultaneously, which is very difficult to do. Bruce Hornsby, of the range, he has that kind of ability. So I called her up and said, Janice, I'd like to record this. Would you be willing? She said, sure I would. Of course you had to pay her, but yeah. She said, of course I would. So long story short, we went in the studio. And I remember she started playing and I started reading. Excuse me. And I noticed the sound technician was bobbing his head. I said, So we recorded the poem to music. And on the night of his birthday, here's what I did out of respect and reverence for her. I read her poem the original way that she wrote it. Then I read my, edited version, revised version. And then we had a nice surprise for her husband. In the venue where we were at, I actually took the CD and they actually put it in their sound system. And it played through their sound system. She told me, he must have played it 100 times for 2 weeks. And I guess that was the birth of me being introduced to this idea of poetry. And I made a commitment to myself that this is something I wanted to do more of, to read, write, and even perform and record poetry. And what I did was I began to study poetry.